All right, everyone. It's the official bell of every meeting that we go. My name is Chris, and I am an alcoholic. Please silence all cell phones, and if you can, kind of pause the texting out of respect for the speaker. And also, if you could remove your hat for the respect of where we're at, we've been asked. And as far as announcements go, after this meeting, we're going to have and hold a reception across out the doors to this way and down the alley in the basement where all good drunks go. And we have a buffet set up, just nothing but nasty sweets. So we'll all be there, and please join us. And we'll see what else we got. I think that's about it. This is an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. We are glad you're here. In support, well, I won't even do that. Well, I was going to stick to the singleness of purpose, I believe, based on this history. But let us open this meeting with a moment of silent meditation, followed by the Serenity Prayer. Prayer. God, grant me this serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and to help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any cause. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics achieve sobriety. And I have asked Johnny to read how it works, followed by Martha, you'll follow him to read the 12 traditions, and then Danny will read the 9-step promises.
Hello, everybody. I'm Johnny, I'm alcoholic. This is how it works out of chapter 5 in the Big Book. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. Usually men and women who are incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates, they are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. There are those too who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we're like now. If you've decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. At some of these we balked. We thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Remember that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help, it's too much for us. But there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Half measures have failed us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We asked his protection and care with complete abandon. Here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. Number 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Number 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Number 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood it. Number 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Number 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Number 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Number 7, humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. Number 8, made a list of all persons that we'd harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Number 9, we made direct amends to such people except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, continued to take personal inventory and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Number 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. Number 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Many of us exclaimed, "What an order, I can't go through with it. Do not be discouraged." No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We're not saints. The point is that we're willing to grow along spiritual lines. The principles we've set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. And C, that God could and would if He were sought. Thank you.
I'm Martha. I'm an alcoholic. These are the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. 1, our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon AA unity. 2, for our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God as He may express Himself in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern. 3, the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. 4, each group should be autonomous except in matters affecting other groups or AA as a whole. 5, each group has but one primary purpose, to carry its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. 6, an AA group ought never endorse, finance, or lend the AA name to any related facility or outside enterprise, lest problems of money, property, and prestige divert us from our primary purpose. 7, every AA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. 8, Alcoholics Anonymous should remain forever non-professional, but our service centers may employ special workers. 9, AA as such ought never be organized, but we may create service boards or committees directly responsible to those they serve. 10, Alcoholics Anonymous has no opinion on outside issues. Hence, the AA name ought never be drawn into public controversy. 11, our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need to always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. 12, anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dan. I'm an alcoholic. These are the 9-step promises. If we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we'll be amazed before we're halfway through. We're going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations we used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize and will work for them.
All right. Clean house a little bit. I'm Chris, alcoholic. And how this came to be, people ask. We honestly don't know, but we just reached out. And Lyle was gracious enough to respond back, and then ping pong back and forth a lot. And, his kindness and his story reaches around the world, and he travels around the world with Barbara a lot, sharing experience, strength, and the love of AA and the fellowship. And Lyle, I'll speak for everyone here that we love you, and Barbara, we love you more. So you have to put up with it. So. But please, everyone, help me welcome Lyle Prowse to the podium.
My name is Lyle, and I'm an alcoholic. Is this thing working? Can you hear me okay? Okay. I can remember the first time I said, my name is Lyle, and I'm an alcoholic. It took me 3 attempts. I could not get that word alcoholic in the same sentence as my name, because I never thought I'd be an alcoholic. I had sworn I would never be an alcoholic. And to couple up those 2 words, that one that has such stigma and shame and disgrace attached to it, and put my name next to it was a real challenge. I have no idea how many times I've said that now. But AA is a very core centerpiece of my life, although I believe that my journey in AA is designed to equip me to live in the big world outside. So I live 360 degrees. I do a lot of things. I will never leave AA, and I always try to pay my share to AA because it's the thing that has given me the life I've got today. But I also have other things that I do, which is what I think the main purpose of getting sober is all about. Supposed to talk about what we were like, what happened, what we're like now. I used to say what it was like, and I don't think it's a big deal. And most of the speakers I hear actually say what it was like. And I got a real cryptic email from a guy in Southwest Georgia. He identified himself as an old-timer, and he said, "I'm listening to one of your CDs with some newcomers, and you're misquoting the Big Book." And I thought, what's he talking about? I don't quote the Big Book. I know speakers that can and do. I've got friends that do. I don't have that gift. Although sometimes, just for fun, I may say, up at the top of page 132, the first paragraph, I have no idea what's there. I just know you go look. I don't know what's there. So I said to this guy, I said, well, I didn't realize it. He talked about the we and the it. So I sent back a little email and said, well, excuse me, I'll try to do better. And apparently that didn't have the ring of sincerity he was after, so I got a second email. And said, well, it really is kind of important. I was sitting there with some other old-timers in the front row, and you started that way, we might just get up and walk away, thinking that if you're going to start by misquoting the Big Book, the rest of the message can't be that good. So that kind of tweaked my competitive spirit at that point, and so I sent him back another email. I said, I didn't realize this was going to be a continuing topic, but I said, let me just remind you that when we read how it works, it doesn't say rarely we've seen a person fail who's thoroughly memorized the book. And so I didn't get any more emails after that. But this AA thing has a way of working its way around. And about 3 years later, I went down to Southwest Georgia, the Flint River Roundup, where I was supposed to talk, and he was my host. But it served a purpose. I've never said what it, and I don't get upset when somebody says what it was like. But it's always a memory jogger for me now. My sobriety date is March 7th of 1990. And typically, my talk will revolve around the last 3 days in my drinking career, which was March 7th, 8th, and 9th of 1990. And I mixed the order up a little bit as far as what we were like, what happened, and what we were like now, because I start with what happened, because it was a gigantic news event in this country, and it swept the nation very quickly. That is, on the morning of March the 8th of 1990, 3 airline pilots were arrested for having flown from Fargo, North Dakota to the Twin Cities, Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, and I happened to be the captain of that flight crew. That was the beginning of a very sensational story, because I became the first pilot in American commercial aviation history to be arrested, tried, convicted, sentenced, and sent to federal prison for flying a commercial airliner under the influence of alcohol. I've thought it's been interesting since then, because periodically I'll see some pilot get in trouble. TSA pulls him out of the line because he smells like alcohol. But he's not there on day 2 of the news cycle, because it's an old story now. It's not a big deal. His life is going to change big time, but when my incident hit, it was huge. And it got on the TV, and it stayed on TV forever and ever and ever. I thought it was never, ever going to go away. There were times when I thought, I don't know that Pearl Harbor had this kind of coverage. It was the lead story. Northwest Flight 650, those 3 pilots. And so it was. And I can tell you, I was someplace here the other day, it was a couple of months ago, I guess, and there must have been a dozen people came up to me and said, "Oh, you're that guy they made the movie Flight about." And I said, "No." I said, "I don't know if my story had anything to do with it, but I said, nobody contacted me about that." And I said, "I don't think they did it because they think Denzel and I look a lot alike." Although I thought he did a good job in the movie. The Los Angeles Times even sent me an inquiry on it. I said, "I have no idea. Nobody talked to me about it." But I can tell you the difference between that movie and my situation was that when this arrest occurred the morning of March the 8th of 1990, my life was totally, absolutely destroyed. This was not who I was. It was never who I'd been. I had not lived a life to watch it end like that. And my whole world turned upside down, and all of the things that I'd spent a lifetime trying to achieve and accomplish went out the window right then. I went from having worked hard for 51 years to always achieve and be the best and distinguish everything that I did and leave it with a bright, shiny coat of pride and dignity, to a sense of shame and disgrace and dishonor. They went all the way to my bone marrow. And that was a heck of a transition to make overnight. And I struggled with that really big time. Eventually I lost the will to live. Because that's not who I am. I'd had a good life. But within that life burned the slow flame of alcoholism. And I went for a long time before it finally manifested itself and gained the strength that it needed to turn me upside down and inside out. But it has a power that I don't have. And sooner or later, I can't cope with it. And that's what happened on the morning of March the 8th of 1990. The good thing about what happened to me was it completely, totally, absolutely destroyed me. And before I go any further in this story and start talking about my AA experience, I want to tell you about my initial introduction to AA. I stand here tonight as a loving member of AA, but that was not the way it began. In 1975, I was a young pilot for Northwest Airlines. And let me just stop on that issue. When we go to the podium, more times than not, we don't know what the speaker did for a living, which is as it should be, because we're up here to tell a story about recovery. We're not up here to talk about our careers or our professions. So the only reason I bring this airline pilot stuff up is because it was the thing that drove the story. If I had been a doctor, an attorney, if I'd been an office worker, an electrician, or a plumber, if I'd been anything else, none of this would have been newsworthy. Nor would I have set myself up for a conviction and a sentence to a federal penitentiary. So it's in the context of that and that alone that I talk about being an airline pilot. I have never, ever believed that we have status within the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. That the one and only thing that we come here for, and the thing that holds all of us together, the strength and the glue and the fabric that brings us together, is to achieve that one single thing called sobriety. That's why we're all here, that's what we all strive for, and that's all I ever wanted. So I don't believe we have any celebrity status in Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I've been around a while, and I've been to a number of places around the United States, and I've encountered a few people who don't necessarily share that opinion. Then they're waiting for the AA Hall of Fame to break ground so that they can get their name in there. And I've been with a lot of those folks. I don't hang with them, I'm polite to them, but then I always leave. So I'm here just as another sober member of AA. I got home the following day. I was supposed to have been home that night. I was detained for 12 hours that day, meeting with company attorneys, giving depositions, went to 2 different facilities and gave blood. And over the course of that day, I had a million memories that were just, or thoughts that were just flooding me. And one of them was that I was at Northwest Airlines, which was the only major carrier that did not have a program for alcoholic pilots. And over the course of years, I had seen a number of guys get in trouble with alcohol. And it was always an explosive story among the pilots and flight attendants. And the idea that my name was now going to go on that roster was just brutal. It was just brutal. Let me bounce back to what I was going to tell you a minute ago. In 1975, I was a young pilot for Northwest, and I got a DWI. It was my second one. I hadn't had one for about 5 years, maybe 6 years. And a DWI in 1975 wasn't that big a deal. It wasn't a fun experience, but I knew friends and people that had gotten DWIs, and I knew that the routine was you get an attorney, you pay him, he goes in, you go in to see the judge, it's a $300 fine, and you walk out with careless driving. And at that point in time, the FAA was not cross-checking driver's licenses with DUI and DWI records. This judge perhaps was even a member of AA, because he said, the only way I'll let you do that is if you go to AA for a year. And I got to tell you, I was outraged. I was furious. I had never witnessed such a miscarriage of justice in my entire life. There was absolutely no reason for me to go to AA. But I reluctantly agreed to do that, and I went to an AA meeting. I was there about 5 minutes. And because I'm more perceptive, and sharper than everybody else in the room, and more intelligent and tuned in, I look around and I'm listening and watching what's going on. And within 5 minutes, I knew this was a cult. This was a cult, and these people who were talking were foaming at the mouth, born-again, non-drinking, rabid, fanatic zealots, and I didn't belong there. I knew I didn't belong there. So I figured a way to outsmart the system, which I was successful at, because everywhere I flew in the United States, this is way before cell phones, every city that we ever landed in, first thing I do is go in a hotel room, get the yellow pages and write down the address and phone number of the local AA and create a meeting around that. And I'm turning in stacks and lists of these fictional meetings, and none of which I'm attending. And about once a month, I tell Barbara, I probably better go to one of these stinking meetings in case somebody has to say they saw me. And I tell you, I had a bad attitude. And if somebody would say something to me in there, my first thought was to punch them. I mean, I had a quick temper and a short fuse, and I would think about it, and I'd think, yeah, if I do that, the judge is going to hear about it, and this isn't going to end well. So I would, if they called on me, I'd go, my name's Lyle, I'm an alcoholic, I pass. I just want to get away from me, leave me alone. I'd come home from that meeting, I'd have smoke coming out of my ears. It was the longest hour of my entire life. I'd rather have somebody pull a fingernail out than go to an AA meeting. And I come in and tell Barbara, I said, that's the most effed up bunch of people I've ever seen. I said, my God Almighty, they lose their homes, their cars, their jobs, their kids, their wives. They can't figure this out. They sit around and talk about it for an hour. And I'd say, for God's sake, let's have a drink. And I'd pour a couple of the stiffest drinks I could manage, and I'd get them choked down just so I could chill out and go to bed and get rid of this AA meeting that I'd just been to. That was how I came to AA. And for the next 15 years, I got away with it. I had a lot of things happen. When I get into treatment, I have to do a first step look back. My gosh, all of the matters, the incidents, the events that happened that were negative, that had to do with alcohol, I had several pages of those. But I was dodging the bullets. I had some car accidents. One car accident, nobody got hurt. I got out before the cops showed up. I got in fights in bars, nothing happened there. Woke up in places I didn't know where I was or how I got there. I lost cars a couple of times, had no idea where they were in the city. I had a lot of things going on, all of them alcohol related. But my mantra always was, that could happen to anybody. That could happen to anybody. And I believed it. I really believed it. Until in treatment, I looked back through several pages. I thought, man, all those things couldn't happen to just one person. I got into treatment. Let me back up and tell you that I got home on March the 9th, day after the arrest. I saw 2 doctors that day. Barbara picked me up at the airport. I'd left them a phone message the night before and said, it's been a disaster. I think I've lost my job. And when she picked me up in the morning, I will never forget it. I've never told the story of what I haven't said. She was parked off to the right by the curb, and I felt like I had to climb over the curb to get in the car with her. March the 9th, 1990, and we'd been married a long time, and I was so ashamed I couldn't look at her. And all I could say is, honey, I'm so sorry. She's got a soft voice. She said, who better than I might know how you feel right now? We drove home in silence. Later, I was grateful for that because I thought, what wife, having learned that her husband just trashed a 22-year golden career, would not have said, you have seen this before. It's happened before. You've seen it. You knew the Northwest policy. Why didn't you go back to your hotel room? Why'd you stay and drink? Those are all good questions. I didn't have an answer for any of them. She went to work, and I did not want to be in my own skin. A little while later, I called a doctor who's a PhD family therapist, and he'll get involved here shortly. I said, I need to declare an emergency. I need to see you right away. He said, he cleared the calendar. I went in there. I'm going to hear 2 comments that day that I cannot mentally process. And I went in and I told him straight out what had happened. I didn't mince words. I didn't cut corners. I just told him. And I saw him pull back in some shock and look at me, and he said, God, Lyle, he said, this is horrible. He said, this is absolutely horrible. He started around his desk, and he turned to the left and looked at me, and I heard the first comment there that I could not fathom that on that day, and he said that maybe this is what had to happen. For the life of me, I could not understand why he would say that to me. I didn't know what it had to do with anything that we had ever talked about or discussed, and I didn't respond. He came back and he said, I want you to go see another doctor across Atlanta tonight. He said, I worked with him years ago. He said, he's a very prominent psychiatrist here in Atlanta. He's also a recovering alcoholic and cocaine addict, and he's certified in addiction medicine. I'd never even heard of addiction medicine. So Barbara and I drove over there, and I haven't had anything to eat or drink at this point for 2 days, and I have very little memory of that meeting. It's just like a blackout. I have a lot of blackouts when I drink. I remember being there, and I remember him asking me questions. I don't know what he asked me. Sure, he took a family history, and I'm sure I gave him good, honest answers at that point. I was done. I was all done. But at some point in time, he looked at me and said, Lyle, you're an alcoholic. You need to get into treatment tonight. And I had no reaction to that. And I look back on it and go, in the 24 hours since the arrest, in a way I will never, ever understand, these dots down in here got connected. I have hated alcoholics my whole life. I have two parents who died from this disease. I saw what happened in my family. I saw what happened in my native community. I saw what happened in the cities around the United States when I flew around. The people, the drunks that were passed out in the alleyways, the doorways, the brown paper bags, the dirt, passed out on the grass of a park. Those were alcoholics. There's no way I could be an alcoholic. But in the 24 hours since the arrest, I knew. And I told him that. I said, I thought you would tell me that. I'm okay with it. But I said, I just got home today. I said, please let me go home. I said, I need Barbara to just hang on to me. Let my mind uncoil. Let me absorb what's happened to me. And I'll go into treatment. He said, you need to go into treatment tonight. Took a breath and said, okay. So we drove back across Atlanta to this treatment center that I'd never heard of. And we're making the final turn there, and the headlights sweep the sign that was right on the corner. I was very close by, and I hit the brakes with a light on the sign. It said Anchor Hospital, Hospital for Alcoholism and Other Chemical Dependencies. And there's a reality to that. The sign is there. I see the words, and the lights are on it. I'm going into a treatment center for alcoholics, the last place on the face of the planet I thought I would ever be. And I know my life's over. And all I can do is sit there and think, what happened? What happened? And I had a little mini flashback over my life, all of the really high points, and it was almost like an eraser had wiped them off the board, and I was sat there. I wasn't even sure at that moment in time if they were real. I had no value as a human being, none. No self-worth. Sometime later, I would read the summarizing paragraph at the end of a long medical report on me, and said, given the history and background of this man, it was unlikely to believe he would ever be a productive member of society. And I remember looking at that and thinking, wow, that is pretty dismal. And that was followed by the second thought, and I thought, well, I'm the one that gave him all the information. So we headed down the hill into the treatment center, and for the first time that day, it occurred to me, this is March the 9th. Today is my 27th wedding anniversary. And I said to Barbara, hell of a way to spend an anniversary, huh? I then heard the second statement that I could not mentally process. Very softly she said, it might be the best one we ever had. I could not fathom that. I could not understand how, at that moment in time, when I knew my life was gone, no pilot had ever come back from anything like this, and the other pilot situations I was aware of weren't even 10% as bad as mine was, and was going to get. And I was done. I knew I was done. There wasn't a whisper of hope otherwise. And I was glad that she wasn't crying hysterically, but I thought at a moment like this, when it is all gone, I don't know how she can think that. A few years ago, March 9th rolled around. It was a beautiful day in Georgia, about 9 a.m. One of my sponsees pulled up, and we live out a little ways. And I said, what are you doing here? He said, it's March the 9th. I've heard your story, so I thought I would surprise you and Barbara and come by and wish you a happy anniversary. So we went inside. Barbara's got coffee going. And he says, well, what's the secret for having stayed married for so long? And before I had a chance really to come up with an answer, she says, I think it's mostly due to the fact that I could just never stand to admit I'd made a mistake. So while I certainly want sponsees to work on character defects, that's one I want her to retain, so I've got a place to live. I was born in Wichita, Kansas, September the 29th, 1938, so I just turned 84. It's a big number, just got here really fast. I used to get a little puffed up at the podium and say, I've still got all my own parts and they all work. And she's sitting in the audience, I have to say, most of the time, right? and kind of coached her. I grew up in a World War II housing project on the southeast edge of Wichita. So, temporary housing project built for World War II called Plainview. It was not intended to be permanent housing, it's still there. And in the 50s, it was not a particularly appealing place. It was a very economically depressed area. And yet my happiest childhood memories revolve around Plainview and all my friends there, because we were all the same. Everything we had was second or third rate. It was patched, taped, wired. Parts were missing, but it was the normal way that we lived. And the funny thing about Plainview was it was a very mixed area. There were blacks, whites, Hispanics, a small Native American segment. We all got along. Everybody got along. I don't remember ever seeing a cop car more than once or twice my entire time there. Everybody got along. We didn't have any gangs. We didn't have drive-by shootings. Drugs were very, very scant. I didn't know anybody in the 50s that did drugs. Everybody smoked except me. And I was part of the Native American community. I'm an ethnic mix of several different things. But the parts that really enjoy going to the bar with me are the Irish and Comanche parts. And, so I'm going to have an interesting night of drinking. I'm either going to find a place with a live Irish band and sit there and sing along to songs like Wild Colonial Boy, or have a couple of drinks and think, this would be a good night to go out and just kill some white people. I was an active member of my Native community, very active member. That was a strong part of my identity. So I was a member of the powwow era group. I danced all over Oklahoma and powwowed all over there. Knew the songs and the traditions, arena etiquette, some of the language. And it was one of the things that I shamed and disgraced on the morning of March the 8th of 1990. I have gone back to the Native community. I left in 1956 to join the Marine Corps. But I've gone back to the Native community. I do not remember ever seeing sober Indians at the powwows that I participated in. I'm sure they were there, traditional people we call them. But they weren't where I was, and I wasn't where they were, and I wasn't looking for them. There's a movement afoot now in Indian country called Red Road, of which AA is the center core part of that, mixed with Native spirituality and traditions and all of that. So I'm an active member of that as well. My parents got their first divorce when I was 14. I try never to go to the podium without thanking my parents, because they weren't drunk all the time. And before I was age 14, they taught me and my sister some really good stuff. She's 2 years younger than I am. That have held me in good stead ever since. So I'm grateful for that. I'm indebted to my parents for the good stuff they gave me. But by the time I was 14, the alcohol had done its thing, and some really bad stuff happened in our family. I'm lucky in the sense that we didn't have any domestic violence. I never had to deal with my dad beating my mom, or a lot of screaming and yelling and swearing. But what we had was that alcoholic undercurrent of palpable unpredictability. I never knew what was going to happen. I could not take friends to my house because of the embarrassment that was going to come from one of them doing something when they were drunk. And I could not do that. They got a divorce, and it was traumatic for me and my sister. In the next 3 years, each of them were married, divorced 2 more times, and I didn't do well in the blended families. I would clash and conflict. Then I would travel from family to family when that happened. And I wouldn't know any of my stepbrothers or stepsisters if they came in here and sat in the audience tonight. I graduated when I was 17, and not too many people went to college from my area. Some did. But I was going to join the service, and one of my buddies had come back from the Marine Corps about that time, right out of boot camp, and I was pretty impressed. So I sat and talked with him one afternoon. We drank beer, and he regaled me with these stories. He's one story after another, all of them sadistic and brutal, about what Marine drill instructors do to their recruits. And I just turned 18, And it's probably an early sign that my thinking wasn't oriented the way it should have been, because I thought, man, I just can't wait to go do that. And within a couple of days, I had gone into a Marine Corps boot camp. I hear a lot of speakers, and one of the common themes is I never fit in. I never felt like I fit in. You won't hear that from me tonight. It's true for them, but it's not for me. Because once I got over the initial shock of Marine Corps boot camp, and I settled into that, I fit in. It was extreme, it was demanding, it was competitive, and I experienced the thing that I'd never seen before, the thing that the Marine Corps is so renowned for, that sense of camaraderie, that inextricable binding of one Marine to the next, that brotherhood that actually takes place in there, and that captured me. Marine Corps boot camp, and I mean no disrespect to the other services, but is a one-of-a-kind experience. And I relished it. As we're coming up on our 13th week, about to finish up, drill instructors called out 3 names of the 3 top men of the platoon. My name was second name called. I was amazed, surprised. I just wanted to survive. I had no idea I was doing that well. I got that one PFC stripe. And you cannot run the Marine Corps as a private first class. But I'll tell you, I could not take my eyes off of that red bordered stripe, because my buddies didn't have it, and I did. And I continued to excel. My drinking, I'm not going to have time for a big drunk-a-log. I've got one, but I can stand here and spend an hour doing that, or I can get through the rest of the story. But I'm always in a heavy drinking environment. I'm always in a camouflaged area. I'm a young Marine. I'm supposed to be tough and hard, supposed to be able to drink hard and play hard, and I do. Later, I'm a fighter pilot. Same thing there. Later, I'm an airline pilot. Same thing there. But I remember the night in Minneapolis when I noticed that I was pulling away from the rest of the crowd on my drinking. But my drinking was camouflaged for a long time, because the other people drank pretty much like I did. And I continued to excel. I continued to excel. I came walking in 4.5 years later. My second promotion was also meritorious, to Lance Corporal. And I came walking in after 4.5 years. My commanding officer took me to his office, and he said, there's a new program out called Marine Aviation Cadet. He said, you're the only guy in the unit whose entry score is high enough to go test for that program if you want to try it. The scores at that time were called GCTs. I remember my number. It was 132. And it was high. And I don't know how it got there. I was pleased that it got there, but I'm not sure that it was really my number, although I certainly wasn't going to give it back. I said, I want to test. So I tested and passed. It was an all-day thing. He said, there's some things you need to know. He said, this is a very intense program. He said, it's 18 months long. And he said, on average, plus or minus, half don't make it. They wash out. You're coming in the back door as an enlisted Marine. And he said, 98, 99% of these people in the program with you are coming in from the civilian side. Every one of them has to have 2 years college minimum. And most of them will have more than that. So I could do the thinking that if half don't make it, and I'm starting off with a marginal high school education, and the rest of these people have 2 years of college, my chances are not real good. And I said, I want to try. So I went home to Wichita. They were having a powwow. And they called for an honoring dance for me because I'm going to Pensacola the next day. I went out and led that dance. And for the next 18 months, I was heavily impacted by that, because I was driven with the idea and the thought that there is no way that I cannot go back to the Native community here in Wichita as a failure. Of all the people here, I'm the only one who has the opportunity to get these gold wings, to have a profession, a glamorous profession, a successful profession, and I cannot come back and tell them I failed. And so I'm driven with that for 18 months. There were 4 phases to flight training, and in every one of those 4 phases, I was the number 2 guy. And every time that happened, I was surprised. I never saw it coming. I never believed it was so. I didn't believe I was doing as well as my flight grades indicated. I'm watching my buddies wash out weekly, sometimes daily. I watch them come to me with a sea bag over their shoulder, their eyes down, never meeting my eyes. Their hearts broken, their dreams are shattered. They are not going to fly for whatever reason, and they want this as much as I do. And every time one of them walks away, I thought, before this is over, that will be me with a sea bag. But I continue to work hard and push. And a work ethic is one of the really good things my parents gave me. I will do whatever it takes to get the job done, no matter what it is. I don't care how dirty I have to get, how sweaty I have to get, or what it takes, I will do it to get the job done. And I got that from my parents because they modeled that for me before the alcohol killed them. Final 6 months, I left Florida. Now I'm getting drunk with all my buddies every weekend. I mean, I run 100 miles an hour with my hair on fire. I want to party and play Friday night and Saturday night. I don't remember ever drinking without getting drunk. And I know that can't be an accurate memory or I'd be dead. But I truly do not remember ever sitting down and having a few drinks. I mean, I just want to keep going until the bottle's empty or the bar closes. That's the way I drink. But on Sunday, I shut it off. And the Big Book talks about this. At some point in time, we could control our drinking at some point in time. And at that point in time, those wings meant more to me than drinking on Sunday. So I wanted to study up, get ready to go for the upcoming week, and I did. 6 months, when I leave Florida and go to Beeville, Texas for the advanced jet flight training, I get hooked up with a bunch of my buddies. We all get drunk at the Officers Club. They said, let's go into town. There's a drive-in called Cane's, and that's where the good-looking South Texas girls hang out. So we went in there, and they went after Carlo, the girls, and I kind of hung back because I wasn't all that courageous. I needed a few more drinks, and I noticed the driver wasn't talking to anybody. I couldn't see her real well. I'm looking at an angle. Finally, I'd had enough to drink, and I'd rehearsed some stuff that I thought was just absolutely deadly. And so I walk up to the car, and I'm thinking, I got some stuff that's so good, she may just take her clothes off sitting there. And she turned and looked at me, and I had not been talking very much, and I should have been. I should have been practicing. Because everything that I had rehearsed left, and she's looking at me, and I'm supposed to say something. And I see those brown eyes. And I wanted to say, I think you've got beautiful brown eyes, but it came out kind of sideways because I go, how's it like a brown eye? Something like that. I mean, I didn't even understand what I said. I didn't even know. I didn't even know what I said, and she looks at me like I just peed on the side of her car. And I turn around and I leave. I'm embarrassed. So a little while later, I'm back drinking. A little while later, she gets out of the car, and I watched her walk in. I watched her all the way in, and she had turquoise shorts on, cute little butt, pretty legs, and I'm looking at that, and I actually had an AA thought. Now, I didn't know it was an AA thought. I recognized it 29 years later when I heard it. But she's walking in, and I'm thinking, I want what she has. I'm willing to go to any length to get it. And I had a chance meeting with her the next day. She had a girlfriend with her. I had a buddy with me. When I was sober, she let me buy her a cup of coffee and told me her name was Barbara. And on February the 25th of 1963, which was her 20th birthday, she pinned a set of gold wings on me, right over my heart. She pinned 2 gold bars on my shoulders. 6 years earlier, I had walked into the Marine Corps as a barely 18-year-old kid private. I'm now a commissioned Marine Corps officer. I have a set of gold wings. I'm a fighter pilot, and I have done well, and I can go home. Which we did. She stayed with my sister for 3 weeks, and as the leave was coming to an end, I called her and said, you're going back to Texas. I've got orders to California. Let's get married. We ran down to a little town called Newkirk, Oklahoma, stood in front of a Justice of the Peace and got married. And in March of this coming year, we'll celebrate 60 years together. I had a wonderful Marine Corps career. I loved what I did. I was with 28 of the finest men and finest pilots that it will ever be a lifetime experience to serve with. It's in an A4 squadron, same airplane John McCain flew. We were one of the first jet squadrons into Vietnam. Barbara and I had gotten married We instantly had 2 little boys, 8 days less than a year apart, and I kept telling people, no, we are not Catholics, we're just horny Protestants. And she went home to Texas with these 2 little babies. I went to Vietnam, flying out of a place called Chu Lai, 50 miles right on the South China Sea, south of Da Nang. A very primitive airstrip built out of sand with interlocking matting, aluminum matting, half of what we needed for a runway. We lived in tents. Temperatures were 100, 110 degrees. We had no creature comforts, no air conditioning, no Air Force lifestyle for us, no ice cubes, no nothing. And we acquitted ourselves extremely well over there. Used jet assist takeoff bottles to get airborne with ordnance to fly our combat missions. Landed in a carrier gear on our return. We were all carrier qualified. I put in for a regular commission over there, knowing that full well it wasn't worth the paper it was written on, because the Marine Corps, that was a commission that would guarantee me a career in the Marine Corps. And the Marine Corps wanted their officers with regular commissions to have college degrees, or significant college anyway. And I had none. And they were highly competitive, and I got one. And I look back, I go, that is exactly what I'm supposed to do. That's what I expect of me. That's what other people expect of me. They did not expect me to go into a bar in Fargo, North Dakota, and become the greatest pariah in all of Marine Corps commercial aviation history. No pilot before or since has done the damage that I did to an airline and to a profession. My damage was spectacular. And I'm not happy about that, and I'm not proud of it, but I own it. I own it. No pilot before or since has done that much damage. I got out of the Marine Corps finally after 11 and a half years, because I didn't want to be separated from my wife and kids between 4 and 6 years. I'd promised Barbara we would not have the kind of family that I had grown up in, and so I very painfully resigned that commission. 3 weeks later, I was in class at Northwest Airlines. And for the next 22 years, I had almost the same kind of experience. I loved my job. I loved going to work. I did it well. I loved the people I flew with in the front. I loved the people I worked with in the back. It was a wonderful job. We got to the airlines, and Barbara wanted a daughter. So we decided to adopt. And we adopted this little Indian girl. And it was a struggle, because we had 2 biological boys. And we fought hard for 14 months to get this little girl. She came when she was 17 days old when we brought her home. Her name was Dawn. And she was the most precious little thing I've ever seen. I found out what little girls do to their dads, because she became the center of my universe. I love my rough and tumble boys, but that little girl was so special. And I thought we had the perfect everything at this point. And when she was 17, she ran away from home. I didn't see it coming. Barbara didn't see it coming. I don't know if I hadn't been drinking, if I would have or not. One of the problems I had about being an alcoholic was I didn't drink every night. I didn't drink in the mornings. Now, I knew alcoholics drank in the mornings. I'd seen it on TV and in the movies. I didn't drink in the mornings. I didn't beat my wife or kids. I wasn't having trouble at work. I'm acing my check rides. I'm performing well. There's no indication, no reason for me to believe that I am an alcoholic or whatever it would be. But one of the things that I did was I deliberately varied my drinking patterns. Sometimes I'd go for a week. Sometimes I'd drink on the weekends. But that was a conscious effort on my part. And then I came up with 2 or 3 tests to see if I was an alcoholic. I passed all of them. They point out in treatment that most normal drinkers don't feel compelled to devise tests to see if they're alcoholics or not. And I thought, well, who knew that? You know. So I think I'm doing okay. I passed up being a captain for 2 years because I want to be there until my little girl graduates from high school and goes to college. I'm so pleased, so happy, so proud that I can send my kids to college, something I couldn't do, but I can do that for them. And as she's coming up on high school graduation, I go to Chicago to take, and I passed this up for 2 years. That was a big deal for me. I go to Chicago to take a special written test, and on that afternoon, when Barbara took me to the airport, Dawn took her stuff, left a note, and ran away from home. I called home the next morning, and I knew something had gone wrong. Barbara immediately told me, and I panicked and blurted out where to go and who to call and where to look. 2 hours later, I'm home. I don't know what happened to me on the airplane. But I'm no longer, when I get off the airplane, I'm no longer afraid for my little girl. I hate her. I hate her like I didn't know that I had the capacity to hate anything or anyone. And I told Barbara, I said, I don't care if she dies in the streets. I said, she will never come back to my home, and now I never want her name mentioned in my presence ever again, period. And I told the rest of the family that. Within 2 days, there was no physical trace she'd ever lived in my home. Everything she'd ever owned was donated and gone. I went to the bank, and I ripped up her adoption papers. I went to an attorney, gave me $500 and disowned her. Then I tried to annul the adoption and couldn't. And in the middle of all this activity, in a way that's only insanely amusing and alcoholic as it can be, I looked around and I thought, I don't think Barbara's handling this too well. She probably needs a therapist. By the luck of the draw, I get in the yellow pages, pluck a name out, and we saw that man twice a month for almost 2 years. I didn't like talking about my daughter, and one time when he was trying to get me to talk about her, I made a statement that I had never consciously formed, as far as I knew, ever. And I looked at him and said, I'm going to tell you something, doctor. I said, I would rather hate than hurt. And he said, you survived a childhood doing that, and if you continue, it'll destroy you. Later in treatment, I saw that. That is what I have always done. That's the only coping mechanism I have. Whether it's in a relationship and I feel like I may be vulnerable, or if it's in a situation where I may experience pain, I call up the anger. And when I get angry, I don't feel any of that. It doesn't penetrate because I'm angry. And I saw that once I got into treatment. And that created some cruel moments for Barbara during our marriage. And I made amends to her immediately after treatment. I've never done that since then. The alcohol quit working for me. I didn't want to go out with the cruise anymore. I couldn't get my daughter out of my mind unless I had to concentrate on an instrument approach with bad weather where I had to actually focus, really focus. And all I did was think about her. And in every town in the United States that we flew into, I knew how long it took me to change clothes, get to the liquor store, get a quart of booze, get back to my room, lock the door, turn the TV on. I wouldn't go to the door if a crew member knocked. I wouldn't answer the phone if they called. I didn't want to go out for dinner. I wanted to drink. And down goes that quart of booze. It quit working because now I mix the drink strong. I don't like it straight, but I mix them strong. Now when I throw a drink down, instead of getting that wonderful relief that every one of us who are sitting here understands it and knows exactly what I'm talking about, I don't get it. That's what I wanted. I wanted the apathy, the float away, the release. I don't care. It's okay. Who cares? It's all right. From every time that booze hit my belly, it was like it hit a fire, and it was gasoline, and up came the hatred and the bitterness, the self-pity and the martyrdom. And then I go through this long list of all these things I had done for this little girl over the course of her 17 years, and look how she repaid me. And by the time I'm at the end of the bottle, I'm emotionally exhausted. And I will do it again the next night in a different town, and again, and again, and again, and again. And I never, ever got that warm relief that alcohol had always given me before. It never came again. And that's pretty much where we were when I was arrested. I went into treatment. I didn't want anybody to know who I was or what I was. It was a week before anybody even knew the color of my eyes because I couldn't look up, wouldn't look up. Excuse me. About day 2 of treatment, there were 2 TV sets there. There it is, all over television. Now everybody knows who I am. They all know. A week to the day that I entered treatment, they announced on TV, I wouldn't go near the TV sets. But there's always 2 or 3 patients who feel it's their designated duty to come report, and they do. A week to the day that I entered treatment, it was announced on TV that Northwest Airlines had terminated me, as they should have. The FAA had issued an emergency revocation of all my flight certificates, as they should have, and I'd lost my FAA medical because of my diagnosis of alcoholism. So I'm stripped bare. I have nothing left, and I have no education to fall back on. We went into a room for group therapy, 8 or 10 of us. They closed the door, and for a reason that I still don't understand, I began to talk, which is counterintuitive to me. And I didn't have that wall of anger anymore. And I began to talk about my daughter, and I broke down and cried. And I hadn't cried before. I didn't cry at my parents' funerals. Man, this thing is leaking all over the place. Wow. I thought, is that me? There was a time when I was nervous enough I would have done that, but not now. And I began to talk about my daughter. And I felt the pain right in the heart. I sobbed. And I was embarrassed. Felt like I was sitting there with no clothes on. Later, I looked at it and go, that's one of the greatest breakthroughs I ever made in treatment. To go back and start to capture feelings that I had shut down many, many years before. I got hold of Barbara and I said, let's put the family back together again. There were no visitors, no phone calls in this treatment center. They said, if you can do that, we'll give you a day room for a visit, because we didn't think that was possible for you. The two doctors heard about it. They said, could we please come watch? And I walked into a day room, and they were standing off to my left. My two sons were there. I saw my little girl for the first time in 2 years. I thought, God, she's smaller than I remember. And in her arms was a 5-month-old granddaughter that I didn't really know anything about. Thanks. Not used to having to clean myself up at the podium. So. A few parties I had to do this at, but not at the podium. I can't tell you what it was like for me to walk across that room and put my arms around my little girl and tell her how much I loved her instead of how much I hated her. I had many experiences in treatment. The only reason I come to the podium to do these things is because as much as I wanted to believe what I was hearing because I had nothing left, I didn't really know if these 12 steps worked. I didn't really know if everything that's in the big book was true. I didn't really know when I read the 12 and 12 if it had application, or when I left an AA meeting and walked out here on the sidewalks, if that carried over into it. And the only reason I come here is to tell you, yeah, it does. It does. I have a role that I have to play in that. I have my part to do in that. But if I do my part, all the rest of that is true. It is all true. I went through 6 legal crises when I'm in this treatment center. They don't want to come in there and tell you about stuff that's going on the outside. But they were having to come talk to me because serious things were going on. 6 legal things. It starts with an indictment up in Minnesota. That was going to be a misdemeanor and 90 days in jail. That was paralyzing to me. I've never been in jail. I thought the only time I would ever be locked up was as a POW if I was shot down in Vietnam. 90 days in jail, I can't do 90 days in jail. Then North Dakota comes into it. Then Minnesota doubles the penalty. North Dakota doubles the penalty. Then next, the federal marshals are going to take me out of the treatment center in handcuffs to arraign me. Finally, the 6th one, I step outside and there's a doctor. And I knew this was serious because he had never been a doctor outside before. When we go down to his office, he said, I want you to sit down. My counselor was there. He said, federal grand jury has just indicted you. You're looking at 15 years in federal prison. An attorney's coming in and a $250,000 fine. An attorney's coming in Sunday and wants $50,000. I didn't have it. We went broke within 30 days. I had grown up with nothing. Now I've taken Barbara there. She didn't deserve it. My feeling about alcoholism is that what happens to the alcoholic is fair. I think when you do what you did, you get what you got. I'm responsible and I'm accountable. The tragedy of this disease, in my view, is what happens to her and my kids and my friends and my family and all of the people who care about me. That's what's not fair. So he says to me, after he tells me this, he said, I have to ask you, you're going to hurt yourself. I said, no. And I walked out of that room. I felt like every nerve in my body had shut down. I go back to my room, and I collapse, and my head's on the carpet, and I'm crying for the 2nd time in treatment. And the only prayer that I could utter was, God, I can't do this anymore. I've done it 6 times. I don't have anything left, not even one more time. Not even one more time. Please, please help me. And I slept that night. I got out of treatment, was instantly in a heavily publicized 3-week trial. We draw the toughest judge in the Minnesota Federal District. And he had strong personal feelings about this event, and I didn't begrudge him those. I saw him every day for 3 weeks. He had every right to those feelings because I knew I had been involved in a horrific betrayal of the public trust. I never made an excuse for it from day one. I knew what I was responsible for having done. I have an advantage over the other 2 guys, though, because I'm an alcoholic. And if we're not engaged in legal stuff at night, I go to an AA meeting. And at first it's scary because I walk in there, I'm all over TV, and the minute I walk in the room, they know who I am. And I never shared in those meetings. I sat there and listened to you talk. But there's an air and there's an energy in these rooms that I was able to capture and take to the courtroom the next day. It's an indescribable experience to sit there and listen to the prosecutor and everybody else tell the entire world, all of it being picked up by the media, but a no good piece of worthless crap you are, always have been and always will be. And it's being broadcast and published everywhere, in all the tabloids. The late night comics are involved, Jay Leno in particular. Jay Leno called me in June of '96 and apologized to me. You're hearing about 30% of the whole story. There's so much I just don't have time to talk about. So we go through the trial. I don't have much recovery, but I've got enough because I've worked hard for what I've got. I told this attorney, I'll be found guilty, and when I am, it'll be okay. I wanted to plead guilty, and he talked me out of it for reasons that made sense. And they told me in treatment, you're going to have to learn to trust, and you're going to have to learn to listen. So I did. I said, well, I'll be found guilty, and when I am, I want you to know I'll be okay. I'm the captain. Everything comes to me first. The jury goes right out. They come right back in. I know what that mostly means. So I stand up, and the verdict is guilty. And I see him. He's on my right. He flinches, and I reach over and pat him. I said, it's okay. It's okay. We come back a month later for the sentencing. Excuse me. Everything about this went very, very quickly. These legal things can get on there and draw out forever. I was arrested in March. I was in a federal courtroom in July and August. I was sentenced in October, and I was in prison in December. So my thing went very, very quickly. We come back from the sentencing, and he says, my attorney calls me, he said, I just got a notice from the judge. The sentencing guidelines are 12 months to 18 months. He can go all the way to 15 years. He has strong feelings. He's notified everyone, including the other 2 attorneys and the media. He's going to go up, way up on the sentencing when he sees you in a day and a half. I had experienced terror all the way to my bone marrow so many times that it was familiar. And it came again, because I thought, I'm going away for a long time. I told Barbara, I said, I'm powerless. This is step 1, I'm powerless over this. This is all about the serenity prayer. So we walked in for sentencing that morning. I gave her my personal effects. I said, I don't think I'll be coming back. I've been in treatment with a federal judge, and he said, there's some things you need to know. And he told me about the sentencing. And he said, most of that's a charade. He said, when we come through the door, the sentence is set. He said, you will have witnesses talk, your attorney will talk, maybe you'll talk. But he said, all of that is a charade. And judges across the country have told me that is so. They have corroborated that. That's an exercise in futility because they have studied the sentence, they have researched it, they have put it down there, and they're not going to stray from it. So I knew that nothing I said that morning was going to have any effect. My turn to speak, and I stood up, and I was so scared I didn't even know what I was going to say. I talked about being grateful to be sober. I was grateful for the things that had happened in my family. I had accepted responsibility from day one, and I couldn't change anything. The judge announced a sentence on me of 16 months, 2 months less, under the guidelines, and there was a buzz in the courtroom. Nobody understood what had happened. I knew that a miracle of some sort had happened. I did not think I would ever know what, why, or how that came about. That was to change. Then he said, this is a complex case. This law was not written for pilots. I'll let you 3 men remain free until your appeals are exhausted. The other 2 said, sure, they'd do that. I said, no, I'll go now. Because I've been in here. I learned that I live life on life's terms. I told my kids, I said, I can't come out the back till I go in the front. I didn't want to do this. I knew I could stay out for a year and a half if I appealed. But I knew that every night when the sun went down, I'm one day closer to whatever eventually is going to happen. And I remembered something in high school English. Somebody later told me it was Shakespeare. It said, "A coward dies 1,000 deaths, a brave man only one." And I thought, I'm not dying 1,000 more deaths. And I told my kids, I'm scared. I also remembered something I learned in the Marine Corps, that courage is not the absence of fear. It's the ability to continue in the face of it. And that's my job. My job now is to walk into the front door of the penitentiary. So on December the 5th of 1990, 34 years to the day that I walked into Marine Corps boot camp, I became inmate 04478-041 in the Atlanta Federal Prison System. Served 424 days in the prison system. I never talk about that from the podium. I usually make two quick comments. I'll say two groups of really, really sick people in prison. The sickest group goes home every night. And then I'll say I made 12 cents an hour in there, and the worst thing about that was there was no 401k plan. The judge put sanctions on me on top of everything else to make sure that I never saw the inside of a cockpit ever again. I was the most horrific example of a betrayal of public trust, and I was never, ever to fly again. And he made sure of that. After I'd been out of prison a year, and another story I don't have time to go into, which is a good story, he lifted those sanctions. Not one chance in 10,000 that this judge would do it, but he did. The FAA then said, if you want to fly again, you start with a private license, literally from the ground up. Not one pilot that I knew thought that was possible. I'd come out of the Marine Corps, and I'd been given a commercial license with an instrument rating. And now they're saying, if you want to fly, you go from the ground up. I looked at it, I didn't think it was possible either at first. I thought, I'll do everything in here one day at a time. I'll do this one license at a time. And so I went after the licenses with that attitude. 10 and a half months later, I'd passed the writtens on all 4 licenses. That's a short statement about a long, long story and a hard, hard journey. But I passed them. But there's a flying part that goes with all of that. Each section has a flying part. I was working in the treatment center that saved my life, and I did it for not quite 2 years. I'm making $14,000 a year, and I'm grateful to have that job. I'm grateful for that job. One of my jobs is taking urine specimens from patients. That's a long way down the ladder from being an airline captain. But I'm going to tell you something. Every time I did it, my attitude was, I'm going to bag them and tag them better than it's ever been done before. And that's exactly what I did. I can't do the flying. I can't do the flying. Suddenly I get a letter and a phone call the same day from a pilot that said, you didn't know it, but I've got a flight school 50 miles north of the Twin Cities in Buffalo, Minnesota. I want you to come up and live with me and my family, go through the flying part free, and get your tickets back. So I go up there. I'm under 13 conditions of probation. I check in with that man and his family and the Minnesota Department of Corrections, and I lived with them for 44 days. Rained out 14 days. I never slowed down, never quit studying. Flew 78 hours in the remaining 30 days, and that's a lot of flying in a little airplane. A lot of flying. I got 4 licenses back, had them by 2 of them by 11:15 one morning. I don't think that's ever been done before. Let me tell you what I don't like about standing up here with this story. When I'm talking about a first-person story, you constantly hear I, me, I, me, I, me. I have to do that because of the English language, but this has never really been about I or me. This has been about what you showed me, what you taught me from the day that I entered treatment to the very day today, how to do these things. Had inmates in prison come up to me and go, how do you do what you do in here? How come they can't get to you? I tell people I survived that prison experience not because I'm a tough Marine, but because I took 12 steps to prison with me, and I know how to use every one of them. I know when to call them up, I know how to apply them, and when to implement them. And that's what I did. The best part of my story is that I get no personal credit for it, really, truly. So I came back to these licenses, and I told Barbara, I said, I don't think I'll ever fly on American soil because of the publicity I've had. Convicted federal felon, alcoholic in the headlines and the bylines. I can spell anonymity and I can say it, but I never had any of it. I respect yours, but I never had any. I said, I'll never fly on American soil. A month later, the licenses physically came in the mail. And within an hour, I got a phone call from the head of the pilot union at Northwest. The grievance had been automatically filed, which I had not activated. Why? Because Northwest Airlines was justified in terminating me. I'm not going to fight that termination. I did what I did, and I got what I got, and I accept it. He said, this is the best phone call I've ever made, because he said 3 hours ago, John Dasberg, who is president and CEO of Northwest Airlines, made a personal decision to bring you back and put you in full flight status at Northwest. If a pilot's airline is mentioned publicly one time, he's forever doomed and done. My airline had been mentioned dozens of times, dragged through the mud egregiously over and over. And this man, whom I have never even seen or met, is going to bring me back and let me fly again. And I sat there with tears streaming down my cheeks, completely unable to believe the words that had just come through the telephone. I thought to myself, he's anticipating heavy negative public reaction. This is an extraordinary decision to make. But even beyond that, if I go back and relapse or I have a second incident, he will lose his position as president and CEO because the board of directors will not tolerate that a second time. He is risking his career on mine. And why he would do that is beyond me. And I talked with him about that. I said I would never have done that. I never got a really good answer from him. He'd call me in once a year and we'd talk for the next 5 years. So I went back and I signed my back to work agreement never to be a captain again. I was okay with that. But even that changed. As I go back to the airlines, and now Northwest has part of this HIMSS program that the other airlines have, and I'm active in that. And as I'm coming up on my final year at Northwest, I'm speaking at United Airlines. I get a phone call late at night. My goal now is to be the best employee on that property. My aviation credentials were never in question. I always had a good reputation as a pilot. But now I want to be the best employee that they ever had. I'm coming up on my final year at Northwest. I get a phone call late at night. Barbara was with me. Same pilot. He said, John Dasberg has just changed your back to work agreement. He thinks when you come back to Northwest Airlines, you should be a 747 captain. I never thought any miracle could ever surpass my return to the airline that I had so horribly shamed and disgraced. Nothing could ever be greater than that. And now I'm going to be a captain again. So I went back and I spent my last year at Northwest Airlines in the left seat of a 747, flying all over the world because I was trusted as a sober member of AA, which John Dasberg said. I retired honorably September of '98, the age of 60. And within 2 days, my attorney called me. He said, Judge Rosenbaum is now Chief Judge of the Minnesota Federal District. He said, Judge Rosenbaum just called me, and he said in 16 years on the federal bench, he has never supported a petition for pardon. But if you want to make the attempt, he'll support yours. I had never even considered such a thing. Getting a pardon from the governor of a state is almost impossible. Getting a pardon from the President of the United States is 10 times more so. This judge wrote an affidavit that is so chokingly powerful. This is the man that sent me to prison. And if I had to stand here and read it to you, by the time I get to page 3, I've got tears streaming down my cheeks. I cannot believe the words on this document that this man who sent me to prison writes about me. It's all because of AA. It's all because he has watched my journey in AA and sobriety. 2 years later, I come walking in and there's 8 phone messages telling me I just received a presidential pardon. My story for 23 years has ended right here. This wonderfully high point. But I'm going to talk about something else now, and I do it with the permission of Barbara. We get sober, and our life changes. We know that. But life continues to happen. And life gets lifey. And about a year ago, I get a phone call from a neurologist, and he says, I have to tell you that Barbara's spinal tap fluid has come back positive for Alzheimer's. And the bottom of my world fell out. I said to her, how do you want to handle this? And she said, I think we need to be open about it. I said, I think how we handle this can have an effect on other people that would be positive and strong. I've seen it before. I've seen other people deal with these things. I can't think of a better way to make a problem worse than by picking up a bottle. I can't think of a better way to dishonor her memory than for me to now go out and start drinking again. She was here 32 years ago for me. She never flinched. Now I get to be here for her. I watch people get upset and blame God. I don't believe God had anything to do with this. I believe God had tears in his eyes the same afternoon that I did. And I believe if I make God my problem, he can never be my solution. So Barbara and I are fighting this thing, and we're doing some things to try to do something about it. I don't know if we'll win or lose. I'm not big on snake oil or magic bullets, but I'm not going to sit and do nothing. And if we lose the battle, it won't be because we didn't wage a fight over this. I love you. I want to close with something. I'm grateful to be a sober member of AA. I'm grateful that we can handle life as it comes down the pike for us. And I'm grateful we can do it sober. That we can close out with whatever is coming and do it in a sober way. I'm grateful for that. I want to close with something. I do not wish you joys without a sorrow. Nor endless day without the healing dark, nor brilliant sun without the restful shadow, nor tides that never turn against your bark. I wish you faith, love, strength, wisdom, and goods, gold enough to help some needy one. I wish you songs, but also blessed silence, and God's sweet peace when every day is done. My Comanche name is Yetsutanap. But you know me as Lyle. I'm an alcoholic. I want to thank you for your time here tonight. I want to thank you for my sobriety.
Let's give him another round of applause, please. We thank you both and honor you both. And Barbara, we love you. And I think you feel it here. So, Lyle, thank you again. And so, with that, the reception will be next door. Just follow the crowd. And we will close this meeting with the Lord's Prayer. So please bow your head. Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done